Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first Top Voice Tuesday of February. I'm just beyond excited to welcome one of my favorite people whom I just met, but is truly one of my favorite people, Lexy Martin. Lexi, I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourself here in a moment, so hang tight as we get started. People will dial in and join in here as we really reach the top of the hour. For those of you that have been tracking what we're doing here, every Tuesday we bring another top voice into a conversation to learn about our journey, our backgrounds, introduce their expertise. And so it's just a great way to have really honest and open conversations. Before we get started, if you've missed any back episodes, I have all of these on my YouTube page, Michael J. Lopez 9, super easy to find, just starting to populate that. And we're about 3 weeks into the launch of the book, Change. It's going pretty well. We made it up to number one in management science. I think there's another one that's probably passed us by now, but hey, you get there when you get there. So for those of you just dialing in, please use the chat feature. Let us know where you're calling in from. I know we've had some repeat guests, but let me start off again welcoming Lexy Martin with one of the best titles, Chief Redirector. Lexy and I met about a month and a half ago. She happens to live in Auburn, California, not far from me. And she did a little bio on me for her pivoting stories. So Lexy, tell us who you are and what you do, and how did you get the title of Chief Redirector?
I was thinking the other day that it's really hard to summarize a 55-year career, but
It is. Take your time. You can have more than just 30 seconds, please.
Okay. Yeah, I started out working after I graduated from college as the first woman programmer at Bank of America.
Love it.
Among the first women programmers at the Bank of America. And I spent about 12 years working as a practitioner at the bank at Stanford University. And then I was doing some really leading edge work. This is funny. Integrating data that came from a computer with the word processing capability of a Wang.
Wow.
Okay. We couldn't do, you couldn't take like a patient bill data from a computer and make a nice letter to a patient to have them pay for it. So it had to be integrated, and it had to be physically as well as, programmatically integrated. And because of doing that early work, SRI, Stanford Research Institute, asked me to come work for them to help both product companies get into the new world of office automation. This was in the late 70s. And to help big corporations like TWA, Midland Bank, have a strategy for office automation. And that was a big cultural change, a huge change. So at that point, I became a researcher and found that was my love. I just love doing research, and pretty much the rest of my career has been as a researcher. I was a futurist at the Institute for the Future. But one of the things I discovered along the way is that there's some things I do well and some things others do better. And I always like to work in collaboration with others. And I ended up, becoming a consultant at the Hunter Group. This is a long time ago. And while there, I started what I think I'm most known for, which is I started the HR technology survey that looked at HR technology adoption and the value that organizations achieved. And I ran that for 15 years, retired the first time at age 70, and didn't stay retired. I call that first retirement a failure. Went back to work part-time a year later as the head of research at Visier. Visier is the leading people analytics vendor. Yeah. And so I stayed there for 7 years, and then I finally left, paid work about 18 months ago, and I've been doing what I call redirecting. I think we should probably retire the term retirement.
I agree.
People don't just die, when they leave paid work. What I've done is I've redirected, and I've taken my passion for doing research to do my own research on redirecting and how people make successful pivots in their careers, their lives, and on retirement.
What a great story, Lexi. And I just think that we've got a couple notes in the chat. Tim from New Jersey, and he said, "Hi, Lexi. Great to see you." I think it should be the Tim that's going to be up in a couple weeks. Again,
Cool.
and for everybody who's dialing in, please let us know where you're dialing in from. Lexi, what I instantly loved about meeting you, in addition to your sort of gumption and vitality of this idea of we're never done and there's always room to keep growing and to keep building and reinventing yourself. And I sort of chuckled at your story about being one of the first women programmers in this office automation conversation. Last week Phil and I talked about AI, and here we are again on the dawn of another technology revolution, and had a front row seat to some of the first technology revolutions we were experiencing. I know we had a few questions that I planned, but I'm going to throw a little curveball. What do you think, looking back on that experience and then thinking about what we're going through today? What's similar or what's different? Obviously, the technology is different, but like, what can we learn about what happened in the 70s versus what happened now and this big shift we're going through? How do you compare those two?
Yeah. Running that survey and watching how organizations adopted HR technologies, one of the things that I figured out very early on was that the critical success factor for the adoption of any technology was, what some people call change management. I think others are starting
I'm slightly familiar with that term.
I think others are starting to call it change leadership.
Yeah.
I hope that it becomes something called change collaboration,
Yeah.
because when you're making a change, you have to involve the people that are going to be impacted. So it needs to be a collaboration, with leadership from the top, but also leadership from the bottom. So I think any emerging technology, the critical success factor is managing that change and doing it fast. And have your book. I've glossed through it. I get it. I love it. Um, the thing about change management as a practice, and you know this probably better than others, is that it takes so damn long.
It does.
And
Yeah.
I think that there's maybe a better way to do it by, and something I practiced was, getting people in a room together to talk about a
Yeah.
change.
Experience it. Yeah, you have to experience it. And we are
And to get their resistance, what's their resistance,
yeah.
so that you can address that.
We are our brains are not great at understanding the time horizon of what's required for us to actually change. And so it always takes longer than we think. And by definition, then we lose motivation along that journey. And so there's ways to strategize. You can check them out in the book, and I don't want to go too far down that because I know, but I think what's so interesting to your point about this conversation about the office automation revolution and the AI revolution today, we humans are still the same creatures, right? We have to practice the same behaviors. We have to experiment. We have to try. We have to fail. We have to collaborate. We have to ask questions. We have to use the things and not be so afraid of maybe what's on the other side. So I want to use that as a transition. And we have a hello from Lydia. I see you there in
Hello, Lydia.
freezing,
It's
yeah,
lovely to
freezing
have
cold
you here
Toronto.
to be
We're
here.
in Northern California. It's rainy and I guess maybe 50 degrees. That would probably be a nice break for you. So you told us about your journey. How did you become a top voice? Tell us about your top voice journey and what you've been doing on LinkedIn over the last couple of years, and then we'll talk about this concept of redirecting and what you've learned from
Sure.
the many, many stories you've heard about
Yeah,
redirecting.
I was really surprised when I became a top voice. But when I think about it, when I ran that survey, there would be like 2,500 people a year that would respond to the survey.
Yeah.
So, I knew a lot of people, and I had a global audience. And I've actually been on LinkedIn, I guess, since the beginning because it too was an emerging technology.
Yeah.
And so, I've used it as a platform to, to share research, to share insights, to be in collaboration, to
Love it.
support others
Yeah.
for a really long time. And so, hopefully, that got recognized, and that's why I'm a
Yeah.
voice. How about you?
I've told this story a couple times, but for folks that are new, about 2.5 years ago, we were talking about change. I've worked in the area of change for a long time, and felt like we were having the wrong conversation. I think the professional community of organizational change management, which is full of really hardworking people that are trying to do good, difficult work with companies, with teams. It's not about my criticism of that community is not about the individuals or the intent or the heart or the passion. I just think we were missing the mark on some of the understanding of what's happening to us at the microscopic level when we try to change. Like, what is the human experience of change? And so that led to the book, and I started writing about that and talking about it, and kind of having the kind of no kidding conversation on LinkedIn, and it repetition and consistency and having a message like you was part of what got me there. So let's talk about your world of redirecting and some of the things I think that we want to talk about just because of your journey. How has your own redirecting journey influenced and shaped you? You've had several along the way.
Yeah, I have made a number of pivots in my own life. I went from being a practitioner to being a consultant slash researcher. I went to a product company. Um, and I have some research skills,
Yeah,
and I loved what I did. Not many people stay working into their late 70s.
yeah,
And, and the first time that I retired, I did retire. Now, I spent some time at that point doing what I call cocooning. And this comes out of something that I did when in my early 50s with my husband. We did a program called Life Launch with Frederick Hudson. And he has this notion that, here, I'm going to just show a diagram for a second.
yeah, yeah,
Imagine 4 quadrants. People are either in a job, they're going for it, or after a while they get burned out, they get laid off, they get bored. And what they do is they just go and get another job.
right,
And so they're just constantly kind of cycling through going for it or being bored. And what Frederick Hudson suggested is instead that you take time out to cocoon, to get clear on what are your values, what's your purpose, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. And from that, you go to your next, you explore and go to your next phase. So that's what I've been doing with redirecting. I wanted to know why I failed the first time.
wow, that's so
And,
great.
so I'm using my research skills and my communication skills to, talk about what I've discovered. And I've mostly, I started out by talking to people that I knew had made a significant pivot. Lydia on the call, she's got a great story, was, and go look at her story instead of me telling it. But she made a pivot from, being a practitioner to being a product person. And there were reasons for that. And her current direction is really exciting. And her advice was even more invaluable. And
Yeah,
so I've talked to dozens, 50 people or so about their redirection. You reached out to me. We ended up doing an interview on you. And I've learned from every single person I've talked with. And I had a hypothesis when I started this redirecting research that there were certain things that had to be in place, and cocooning was a really important one. But there were other, things that needed to be in
Yeah,
place, and we can talk about those if you want.
I'd love to.
But and I've confirmed that many of them are important, but I've also learned some new stuff along the way, and it's impacting my life.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I just there's so much we. Hi, Summer. I see you on the call. It's good to see you. There's so much we can learn from you, and I say this. You are truly one of my favorite people because I just think there's so much we can learn from the wisdom of your journey and from these concepts that I think that have been a bit archaic in our own life. This idea of retiring, and I'm going to take it back to the brain and some of the research that I've done, which is your brain, like any other component of your body, is a use it or lose it system, right? And so I remember working in big consulting, and I would see, we had mandatory retirement at 60,
Oh
and
my
I'd see
gosh.
these folks that burned up their lives and they'd make a bunch of money and they'd live hard and they'd hit 60 and then
I
they would
was
just
getting started in
yeah,
my 60s.
that's right. And they would just sort of go down, and some people would go down in the tank and have real trouble. Some people would reinvent themselves. But this idea of cocooning, I think, is so interesting because we are, I think, so much in a hurry to, in the first half of our life, we tend to be in such a hurry to build, to accomplish, to create, to promote, to pick your term, earn money, all of these things that we're doing. And I think sometimes we miss the moments for reflection, which is what you're describing in this cocooning experience.
Right.
I can talk about mine, but I want so. What are the things that you learned in your cocooning experiences? Like, what were the big aha moments for you that led you to the next thing?
Hmm. I guess the most important thing I learned was to really articulate my personal values. What was important to me and what did I want to share with others. Um, and I guess it was the first time that I really started to understand that I was valuable. I mean, not that I didn't before, but I truly got that I had some important things to say, you know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I uh, I also realized that not everybody was the same way, and so I wanted to support them. You know,
I think there's such an interesting. So I'm 51, right? So I'm at the back half, on the back nine, let's call it. And you've got a few miles on your journey in front of me, and I'm learning from you. And every time that we talk, and you mentioned this just getting started, and I feel that way about the journey that I'm on and the things that I've done. And I look back at my 30-year-old self or my 40-year-old self, and I wonder if I had had the opportunity to cocoon better instead of just moving to the next thing, how I might have gotten here sooner, perhaps, or maybe I wasn't intended to be here. And we have a question from Doug. I'm gonna save that question in a minute. So I see you, Doug, and he and I caught up yesterday. Um, so I've just learned so much from this journey about this idea of serving others, which is what you've shared, and then I have something to say. And we talked about this yesterday. Having just wrote a book and know other people that have written books, we tend to undervalue our experience and our wisdom and our skills. You mentioned like you have skills to offer and you had something to say. And part of what you've done is you've heard other people's stories and now started to pull together a set of insights. So let's talk about what you've learned from other people's pivot stories. Like what have been some of those insights that you've taken from other people's journeys,
Yeah.
not just your own.
Yeah. Yesterday when we were talking, you asked me a question about, what was it? What do you learn? What have you learned at the second half of your life?
Yeah.
And, and you have less time left than you had before.
Yeah.
And so make the best of it, and
Yes.
so that's one of the things that I've absolutely learned. Um, I also have some processes that I do that I heard others kind of confirm as being important. And it's this notion of cleaning. It's really important, for me at least, to create a vacuum so that something new can come into it.
I
And so
love
when
that.
I retired, when I redirected both the first time, the second time, I did a massive clean purge of my office studio. And I actually learned this about relationships. Um, my careers had me travel a lot, and there was one year where I was out of the country 6 months of the year, and I had no love life, no relationship, because nobody would stick around with me. And what I ended up doing is I stopped dating. I created a vacuum and I got very clear on what I wanted in a mate. And I feel like I created my husband, the man that I've been married to ever since.
I love
Um,
that.
and this notion of doing two things. One is creating a vacuum such that you can have something new come in and you can build from that. And the other thing is to reflect on what you've already accomplished and to
Mm.
acknowledge yourself and to realize that you've been valuable. So cleaning is a really important thing, to declutter, to create a vacuum into which your new passions can come. So that's one of the things I've learned. Can I go on?
I want to respond to that. I just, for those of you listening, if you don't find this conversation to be, I mean, I just your grandchildren, Lexi, are the Luxy. They're just the luckiest kids in the world. I think everyone should be talking to you on a regular basis. That just this wisdom is just pouring out, and I think there's a couple things I want to tie to that you've said, which are really interesting about this idea of cleaning and your physical space. I actually talk about this in the book that our environment is a signal to us that something is different. And when our environment changes, it's a prompt, and there's ways that we can create access, we can create constraints, but there's a real power in what you're describing, that we should remove things that in some ways are even the reflections of an older identity that maybe doesn't serve us, as well as making space, this idea of making space. And actually I talk about this in the book, that one of the things that happens when we get older, over the age of about 25, in terms of learning, is we don't create new neurons, we don't learn the same way we did as kids. And so you have to actually unlearn something, you have to make space. You don't make new neural pathways. What you do is you repurpose the pathways that you have. And so if I want to learn to play piano, and I'm going to dedicate some time to that, i have to I have to move something else out to make space for that. And I love the way you're describing this idea of how that can apply at an emotional level, at a social level, at a professional level. And it's interesting because I think a lot of the things that we hold on to in that older identity are the things that keep us from the cocooning experience. And so I just think that that's really, really powerful.
I learned a lot about that from other people that I talked with in different periods of their life. And I think it's particularly important for people who retire. You talk about my grandchildren and my kids, they may or may not want the stuff that I've collected, so I better start cleaning that stuff out.
Well,
But
it's not about what we leave to our kids, it's about what we leave in them, right, in terms of the wisdom and experience.
my husband taught, I don't have children of my own. I got children when I married my husband. And his idea was, by the time they're 5, they're they're their own people.
They are
So
who they
all you
are.
can do is you love them. You just
You
love them and
you love
support
it.
them.
Yeah,
And that's I learned a lot from my husband. I
that's
learned
one.
a lot from uh, both my initial cocooning and life launch, as well as talking to others around needing to have financial stability,
Hmm.
and to spend below your means and save for retirement,
Yeah,
for redirection, for pivoting, um, and so that you're not beholden to having to have a job, and you can take your time, you can cocoon, you can do what's important to you to make the best pivot when that comes up for you. Another
that's
thing that I learned was around purpose. Um, my purpose kind of loosely is I'm a researcher. I'm going to use my skills to do research on something that I think is important and I needed to learn for myself. And I'm going to communicate that as well as I can. And I did that for years with, office automation, HR technology, people analytics, and now I'm doing it on redirecting. But, people get scared about the question of, what Mary Oliver says, what will you do with your one wild and precious life? What will you do with your precious life? Now,
love
that's
it.
a scary question, but it doesn't need to be. But I think people need to take time out to, kind of understand what their purpose is. And I think the best thing I learned about that was if you don't know the answer to that question, try this on for size. Give and grow.
Yeah,
So I'm a volunteer. I give my time to my local community as a master gardener. And I'm growing constantly. I'm learning new things. I mean, like I'm not like Lydia on the call here, who really has embraced AI. But I learn new technology as it comes out. I've always
yeah.
adopted emerging technologies, and I think we owe it to ourselves to try to learn new things. I've been a art quilter since the 90s, but I decided I wanted to learn how to paint.
I love it.
And I am a watercolorist now, and I'm not very good, but oh man, do I learn a lot by doing it. Um,
That's just incredible. I want to get to Doug's question. We have just a couple minutes left, and again, I just want to say thank you, Lexi. I've been so excited for this conversation, and it certainly won't be the last one that we have. So Doug's question, I'm going to read it for those of you who can't see it. I find some people retired in their 50s and couldn't be happier. Others, such as you, Lexi, redirect and continue working. Do you have any observations about what distinguishes one from the other? Why are some happy retiring at 55 and others not? Do you have any insight as to what's sort of behind when some people can just sort of pause and move on, or some people need to keep moving?
um, uh, I just saw Lydia's response to my comments about her doing AI. Doug, I would actually love to talk to someone who retired at 55 and who is truly happy, because I haven't talked to them. It's like I guess maybe I talked to one person, and what he's doing right now is he's making gin.
Well, that sounds good. Yeah,
It's
that
like he
sounds
made
fun.
a real pivot. He left a job at a tech company, and now he's making gin. Um, I suspect you're right that some people retire at 55 and they're happy, and that's not me, and that's not the people I've talked with. I think that they have a purpose beyond just being happy. And that's not a bad purpose. I really get it. Sometimes a purpose can be as simple as just being a good parent, being a good grandparent. But, I think for me, there's more to life than, golf and traveling and spending time with my grandkids and, spending time with friends. I have to do something that I feel gives value. So I don't know. I guess the people I've talked with
Yeah.
want to continue being of value.
I,
And,
I think
and I'm sorry, I might have been too glib on that, Doug. So please get in touch with me and let's have more conversation
yeah.
on this.
You should talk to Doug. Doug used to be a client of mine at Clorox. Doug has retired and is now consulting and helping companies change their culture. And
See, he's still doing something.
he's still doing something. Yeah, we talked. We just talked yesterday. So um, I just want to say thank you. We're almost at the end, and I remember. Yeah, I recall we have a new tradition. We're doing a bonus question. It's a pretty fun one for you. And the question that was left for you is: tell us about your name. How and why did your parents decide to give you the name Lexi? Is that short for anything, or is it?
Yeah, that's a great question. My name is Alexia, and my mother named me. She's really good at names. She named me that in honor of her mother, who adopted her, whose last name was Alexander. So Alexia was a derivation of that. And I think I am the first Alexia. I did some history on that, and if not the first, among the first. And
Wow,
I
that's
love that
awesome.
it's a name that's given to others. And Lexi, Alexia was such a big name for a little 4-year-old. And so, people who love me call me Lexi. And there was a time when I demanded to be called Alexia because I needed to be seen as, uh,
Great.
professional. But Lexi, that's what people who love me call me.
Uh, well, we all on this call are going to call you Lexi because of this conversation and what you've done
Thank
for
you.
us. And I just want to say thank you to the folks that dialed in. I just so much wisdom about cocooning and making space and cleaning and having a purpose and giving and growing. I hope that everyone got as much out of this conversation as
Yeah, I
I got.
would
And so,
really like others to take a look at the research that I've done because there's a whole lot more to it. There's some stuff about getting healthy, maintaining and nurturing relationships, and
where
being,
can they find your work, Lexi, and how do they find you?
yeah, redirecting.work, and you can find me on LinkedIn as Lexy Martin.
That's great. Thank you so much. This conversation will be up on my YouTube channel later today. Thank you again to everyone. Thank you so much, Lexi. It has been a joy of my life to get to know you, and I'm excited for our continued collaboration. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.